Hello and welcome back to Historical Humans. Today we're going to try out something just a little bit different. We're going to be reacting, and we're not going to be reacting to just anything. We're going to be reacting to William Shatner's series, The UnXplained. Now, for some context and some backstory, on archaeology Twitter, which is actually a thing, believe it or not, William Shatner got engaged with a bunch of scientists and archaeologists who were invited to speak on the show but refused due to the lack of credibility of the research presented. So, like any good self respecting archaeologist, Colum and I are going to watch the episode and we're going to critique it, see what our thoughts are, and just kind of give it a good old once over. And I think we're not going to be disappointed. So, without much further ado, let's just jump right into
sensationalism, little clickbaity. So far,
a little
nothing
sensationalist.
too crazy.
This
Nothing
is entirely.
too crazy. It's for entertainment purposes. It's trying to be education as entertainment. So far, it hasn't crossed the line into entertainment
Peru,
for entertainment's sake.
1990.
I'll stop right here because we just did an unknown civilization thing.
Yes.
And all right, those of you watching us at home, much of my undergraduate work was done by archaeologists who specialized in places of such as Peru in South America. And I'm just going to say this right here. The Inca were only the latest iteration in a long line of several dozen civilizations that comprised the territory of what is now Peru and some of the surrounding countries. To be pre-Inca in Peru is little more than being pre-Columbian in North America. The Inca, while they were around for a good chunk of time, had a lot of things that happened before them, a lot of other civilizations. Two of the most famous are the Mochi and the Wari, and just for it to not be Inca is significant just because it means it's older than them, and that is, always harder to find, and that's wonderful for Corral. But I get the feeling we're about to jump off a cliff here.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out that the Inca were not the only people there at the time of the Inca, and they certainly weren't the first people there.
But that's a very important point that you just made of like the time depth there. You're literally looking at maybe the past 500 or 600 years.
Yes.
Of Inca history, and there's so much more before that. And the way they frame that argument is, oh, there's this ancient city, but it wasn't built by the most prominent one that everyone knows, or the
most recent version is there's this ancient city that wasn't built by the United States. It's like the Inca haven't been around that long in terms of human history. For context, just to jump over a little bit into like Chile and that region down there, they have 3,000-year-old ritually buried mummies in Chile. They mummified people on the desert flats in some places where it is very dry and very easy to do that, and they buried them with grave goods 3,000 years ago. So for something to not be from within the last half a millennia means nothing for this region. That literally just means it's from this region.
Yes. And I think
we're about to jump down our first rabbit hole and take our first leap from archaeological science into true pseudoscience. I feel that coming up here. I just want to say that.
Yeah, let's see what happens next.
Let's cut
it real quick right there. That is a common foil that you see amongst a lot of archaeological pseudosciences, is this overemphasis and over sensationalization of pyramids. And there's a lot of mystique and mystery around the idea of pyramids. Like, how did they get built? Why are they so prevalent? Why are they all over? Until you stop and think, what's the easiest way to build a structure? What's the easiest way to stack a lot of dirt on top of each other?
Additionally, too, with the pyramids being big and central and all that stuff and having all this emphasis on them, yeah, it's a public works building. It's going to be at the center of your town. It's going to be bigger than your house that you and your immediate family probably built, because the pyramid is something that all several thousand of you spent lifetimes building up, rather than the 10 of you that you are related to built in a week.
Yeah.
Like there's big difference there. And before we hit play again, I can see this lovely little amphitheater they were talking about before, this little ring at the base right in front of us. We can see it very clearly. This is not an amphitheater in the sense that they're seeming to make it out to be, which is, in my mind, just from what they said, a traditional Greek amphitheater of like literature and plays. This is clearly a place of gathering, but you'll notice there's no ringing out of seats. It's just a circularly enclosed pit with a single set stairwell leading in on one side and a single set leading out. There is no this is not a amphitheater in the classical sense of the term that we are looking at here. It is still technically an amphitheater, but it's just, I feel like they're going to try and draw some parallel that probably shouldn't be drawn with that structure if they ever do get off the pyramid bend.
I mean, you already made one parallel that I think is placed in a lot of this stuff. Not to continue on this tangent, because I think we should go back to the video soon, but just this parallel to Europe in general. When you realize that these people that built this stuff never had any contact with the Europeans, never would have imagined that Europe even existed. So, like, when you start making comparisons or parallels from old world to quote unquote new world, they don't always line up because you're talking two vastly different subsets of people. But the human brain always tries to make these parallels and tries to build these connections.
Yeah. Europe is not the baseline for human civilization. I say this as someone who does a lot of work comparing New World and quote unquote old world to one another. Europe is not the baseline of human civilization.
Center of the city.
We'll see
Greece depicts tigers. There are no tigers in Japan, yet Japan depicts. There's no lions in Japan, yet Japan depicts lions.
So huge issue right here that I want to point out is they're making these comparisons, and obviously this area is desert now, but what was the historical profile? One, how old is the city? What are the carbon dates? Like, what are the C14 dates? And then secondly, you can actually do core sampling to tell what the environment looked like during that time period. Because, yeah, they're making the comparison to the Amazon currently, but how do we know the Coral region wasn't a heavily jungle forested area 5,000 years ago, so to speak, whenever this civilization happened?
Yeah. Moreover, too, this is an educated people we're talking about. With their architecture, making these monumental structures that we are discussing.
Not to mention that even though they didn't have vehicles, they could still travel too.
That's what I mean. Trade networks.
Yeah.
Trade networks. Like the island of Japan has depictions of lions from Africa.
Well,
the people of Japan did not come from Africa. They did, they are the people of Japan. They did not directly walk from Africa to Japan, but they had a trade network that connected them to there through about 15 different intermediaries. And so they knew of the beast.
And like our podcast episode on Rapa Nui, there was trade as far as South America from Polynesia. So, the idea of travel and trade, it's not foreign.
Yeah. You can depict a monkey without ever having seen one if you trade with someone who heard of one.
Archaeology. The idea of cultural diffusion, the dissemination of ideas from groups that are fringe or trading with each other. Because as Colum so graciously put it, you hear someone talk about these monkeys, you're going to start translating that and having monkeys in your own culture and your own ideas. And then you tell 3 other people about this creature with a tail that curls around branches. And the information passes on and disseminates real quickly.
Imagine on YouTube, a lot of times you'll find these videos that are like drawing from descriptions where they get like 3 or 4 artists, they give them the same description of something, they tell them to draw it, and there's 3 or 4 completely different images that come out,
like the old telephone game
of it, and it's the same description that all these people are working from. That's what happens when you see a lot of different versions of animals in places that those animals didn't exist. It's diffusion. You can literally, we do it these days for fun, like on the internet. People do that for fun.
Or like rumors are a good way of information dissemination. If you ever had a rumor spiral out of control and you find that people you don't even know about the rumor, or like friends of friends of friends, it all spreads. Okay, so let's unpack this real
I want
quick.
to unpack this timeline. I want to start on the right end of the timeline because we're going that way. We have the Olmec in 1500. The Olmec are not they're not a Peruvian civilization. I believe they are Proto-Aztecs in Mexico.
Yeah, like Central America. Yeah. I think Guatemala, Honduras, parts
I
of
think they
southern
get down to
Mexico.
Guatemala and Honduras. If they do get down into that lovely little peninsula converging on Panama. But I believe most famously the Olmecs are the pre-Aztecs.
Yeah.
In terms of the Mexican basin. And it's like this is way north that they're saying, because this is the only other shall we say New World civilization that they're showing on this map.
But they also made that
1500.
They made that comparison again, how he talked about it, of linking Corral with the with the Great Pyramids of Giza. Like, oh, they made them around the same time, and
it's almost as if independent invention and societal growth is allowing humans at about this time period to begin experimenting with monumental architecture and engineering.
Yeah.
And also we're talking the Great Pyramids of Egypt right here. These pyramids, these massive pinnacled ones, these ones are predated by several generations of step pyramids and bent pyramids and 1,000 other failures before we were able to bring this into existence. And I'm sure the people at Corral were probably the same.
It's almost as if there's an entire age dedicated to, this working of stone.
Mm-hmm. It's almost as if we figure out we can stack stones. Let's see what we can really do with this.
Yeah, it pulls a lot of comparisons that are problematic, and
we're pulling into Stonehenge, pseudoscience's favorite baby.
Yeah, samples that can be dated far earlier than anybody expected.
Okay, more
I'm curious, far earlier than anyone expected. Can we please be more vague? Because what were people expecting?
Yeah, well, that's just it. That's the whole crux of archaeology. It's usually the older material is down low, then newer stuff fills in on top of it. So you should see this chronological stratigraphy.
But I just want to ask the narrators here: what date were you expecting this thing to be dated to? Were you expecting it to be dated to the Peruvians? Were you expecting this to be 500 years old?
And the fact that they keep benchmarking to the Inca just
forcing archaeologists to redefine the timeline of human history.
Problem there. Forcing archaeologists to redefine the timeline. Yeah, that's kind of the whole point of our jobs. Our whole point of our job is to refine our understanding and knowledge of these past civilizations, to find dates and to change our understanding. That's the natural progression of science, is to improve the understanding.
If we cannot improve upon our understanding, we are no longer useful and no longer needed.
It's just there's overinflating everything about this thing. Okay. And it's just the whole idea that civilization starts, or that Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization. Yes, it's one of the prime examples. Yes, it's one of the most prominent. But that same process happened all over the world.
Mesopotamia is not the cradle; it's a cradle. Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, the Nile, the Mississippi, basically anywhere where you have large, regularly flooding rivers and other bodies of water, you have a cradle of civilization, because that's the place at which it is easiest to begin building, because that's the place where it's easiest to have food security in the same place year after year.
And fertile soil, crazy.
Yes, that's what I mean. Food security.
No.
They're not going to Egypt to do it. Yes, there's always going to be ruins that prove things are older. There's going to be more ruins. There are other corrals out there. We do not need to go to Egypt to prove that South America has shit.
Yeah,
and I sincerely hope that it's just a hand-fisted transition and not Will Shatner doing more occult pseudoscience than the Devil's Reign.
But see, that's just it. You can make comparisons, and you can make applicable comparisons. You're not going to compare the Corral Society to Egypt. That's just two completely different areas, two completely different portions of the world. Yeah, you can find parallels, you can find similarities, but it's
pyramid
not the
builders
same.
In the desert. That's it.
Now, if you're talking about comparing societies, like, yeah, you can compare Babylonia with Assyria. I mean, they're in the same geographic region, but
Yeah,
like,
you can compare things that aren't in the same geographic region either, just on the basis of what are these people doing that have the same things. Oh, look, when you push humans to the same way, they respond in the same way. If I do the same thing to you over here, and I do the same thing to them over there, they might do the same thing. It's some freaking miracle sometimes.
This is for. This is what we really want to know.
Okay, stop the video.
No one has.
All right, I'll tell you what it's for. See, there's a common misconception among pseudoscientists, like these people, that the pyramids existed as just the pyramids themselves. They, in fact, have miles-long temple complexes extending out beyond them that extend right past the Sphinx and next to the Sphinx, making the Sphinx effectively a part of the Giza Pyramid Temple complex, in which rituals are performed, especially for a society where the dead are considered walking the earth and need space to do their own ritual functions to maintain the balance of life, death, and the universe.
I feel like, to clarify too, a lot of pseudosciences like to try and make these connections between different things because they feel like they have a leg up on the scientists, the people who dedicate their careers to this. They have something that's just, we know something that they don't, and we're so much smarter than them. When in reality,
it's called, I got a rejection letter from Harvard once, and now I'm bitter.
Still never stopped me.
Yeah.
But it's a common foil, and it's frustrating, and it leads to over doubt. Like, this whole video has shown how much doubt in the archaeologists. Like, archaeologists don't know. Archaeologists are trying to figure out. Archaeologists are trying to unravel. Of course, that's their job.
Yeah. And I appreciate that the man discussing the archaeology of the Sphinx is in fact a geologist. I do approve of a lot of interdisciplinary work and working with other disciplines, anthropology, geology, the GIS people, all those other wonderful disciplines to supplement us and help us understand things. But the geologist should not be the one speaking on whether or not the Sphinx makes sense. That should be left to the historians and the archaeologists.
Or even anthropologists.
Maybe the anthropologists. I don't know. The Sphinx is a little too old for them, but okay.
Yeah, well, there's a few issues there. One, there weren't horses in the traditional sense like we think about, for one. Two, hunting and gathering has, like, how else do I put it besides the people in North America had invented agriculture by this point. The whole reason they were able to build a city is because they had a surplus of grains. They used 3 crops, and the 3 crops were able to support a society. It was beans, squash, and corn. Those 3 together, you can plant all 3 seeds in the single hole. They grow together. They're symbiotic, and you could support an entire civilization. They didn't need to hunt and gather, and that's just, it's racist ideals that just permeate the American public education system.
I will say, I will give this show props for saying that this is the wrong impression, as they are doing right here, because it is definitely not how the vast majority of the civilizations out here lived, how the vast majority of any of the peoples out here lived.
But before we give them too much credit, let's see what they have to say immediately after. Okay, pause there. All civilizations come to an end in some regard, and it usually ends up being one of like 3 or 4 culprits. Usually there's a great famine that kills off a lot of people and food becomes scarce. There's intertribal warfare, which happens all the time. There can be the further growth of the civilization. You know, people change, people move on. Maybe something happened to where the climate shifted and they couldn't grow the same crops in the same location, so they had to migrate.
And fun fact, with Cahokia, it's a question of which of these happened, because there is evidence around the end of its time as a great city of them building wooden palisades, which is just sort of a big wooden wall around the city. And there's also evidence that the nearby rivers were causing issues with the crops for several years straight.
Which I don't know if you knew this or not, but a lot of times when food resources become scarce, it leads to further conflict and contact between different groups because, hey, my neighbors up the river have more food than I do. I'm going to die if I don't get their food.
Yep. Yep. Resource scarcity and conflict usually do bring about the end of civilizations, especially when you're building the palisade between the people in the middle of the city and the rest of the city. The palisade is not constructed around all 4,000 acres. The palisade is constructed around the complexes surrounding the immediate mound.
But let's see what archaeologists are confused about now. A huge point here, he's talking about how there's not evidence of it within oral traditions. We did a podcast talking about oral traditions and oral histories. They're a lot more accurate than you give them credence for. So if there's usually a lack of it within the oral traditions, either the group that was there fully died out, or maybe the theory you're about to say isn't quite accurate.
Also, two more things. Number one, a lot of indigenous peoples don't feel comfortable sharing their folklore with outsiders. It's considered a private thing. So it could be there, but we're not allowed to know about it because we haven't earned the right, and it is considered improper to disseminate that information outside of the tribe. And number two, this little show here just contradicted itself, because earlier recall that they admitted that the people living in the area when Europeans made contact with the area, when colonization and colonialism and imperialism all happened to these people, those people are not the people who made the mounds. Those are different people who came from the north after the mounds have been abandoned. So why would you, as a group of people that weren't here when the mounds went into decline and were abandoned, have the story of how it declined and was abandoned if you're not the people who originally built it or lived there at that time?
It's almost as if there's many holes in these theories.
Area.
Sacrifice does not mean you are erased from the historical record.
Also,
people tend to write down tragedies to make sure they're remembered. People tend to pass them on through oral traditions and stories.
Also, this is immediately discrediting a lot of the indigenous folks because it's saying because they didn't write it down, we would never know. Again, oral traditions hold a lot of those histories and tell about them. And two, there was no written language. Just straight up, there was no written language. So they would not have physical recordings like we would think about, like Mr. Authorman.
Yeah, and if Mound 72 and the ritual human sacrifices that they're claiming happened here is so traumatic that the entire city dissolves and unravels, you can be damn well sure that anyone telling the story of this city, anyone who was from here, is going to talk about why it ended.
Experts remain collectively baffled
We're all
and worried that we may never know for sure.
We know nothing.
We really must question, what really happened, because could it be something much more mysterious?
Okay, that's one thing too, and I will say that that's something not many people want to admit. The more you know, the less you know. Like the
more information you have, the less you can definitively say.
Yes, exactly, because you are on the quest to further that knowledge and to further that thought.
No, we just don't know.
We're talking about humans who are innately complex and
I think we should just pause it here. This is getting ridiculous. There's so many fringe theories and pseudosciences that are being presented that it's really hard to take this with any grain of credibility. Like, they introduce the actual scientific theory, they bring in people who
are not related to that science,
who may be interested and may have some knowledge, but they have their own complex theories. And like, the whole reason this got brought up in the first place was a bunch of archaeologists on Twitter saw this episode and were talking about why they didn't accept the invitation to go on.
Yep. And I just want to say that you can definitely tell that they're not matching experts in the field to the topics they're talking about, when the vast majority of the Cahokia expert testimony came from a man whose only qualifications was that he was an author of a book titled Secrets of the Stonehenge, a monument that is several thousand miles away in Britain.
But see, that's just it, is they pair a unreliable source with a reliable source. So like the gentleman who does work for Cahokia and that spoke about the city, spoke accurately, spoke factually about the site, and does talk about some of the anomalies within the site. However, you notice that he doesn't take that step beyond and doesn't overstep his...
Overemphasize the mystery or the unknown, and just says, yeah, this is what we have here, this is what we've built, this is what we're looking at.
And I think this should be a genuine, like, further critique of the History Channel and how low it's fallen. I know it's a joke, and it's very commonly known that the History Channel isn't fully history, but this is masquerading around as factual and as some sort of, like, deep investigative dive into this mystery. And yeah, to be fair, there's a lot of mystery around our field, but we know more than they're giving off.
We know more than they're giving off, and there's also a thing of just the difference between knowing exactly what is there versus knowing what couldn't have been there. And a lot of the science that they're presenting, big air quotes around science, is things that we have proven through various scientific methods, from oral traditions to written records to archaeological excavation to carbon dating to a million other things that we do as archaeologists. Those are things that the things they're presenting are things that we know could not have been there, because archaeology is the process of elimination, not the process of picking one right answer out of a magic hat.
Well, and that's just it. It's a reductive science. You have to see what's there. You have to deduce what's there, because all that's left in the archaeological record is what remains. Yeah. Like a lot of organic material degrades. It breaks apart.
Yeah, when we dig things up, we see some of what was there, and from that we can extrapolate what could not have been there and what appears to most likely have been there. And those are the two things we are able to produce. And these people are presenting things that could not have been there.
And they're making connections to things that are unrelated or very tangentially related, like the pyramids. The only thing they share in common is the shape. That's it. And they add this mystique and this mystery, acting like we don't know why pyramids are made.
Yeah. They tend to forget. They tend to forget about diffusion, which is where an idea spreads from culture to culture to culture. And when they do remember that diffusion exists, it's usually for some purpose of discrediting a non-white civilization. Yes. And it's also entirely forgetting that independent invention exists, which is the idea that usually, two people without any contact between each other, living thousands of miles apart, can come up with the same idea.
Yeah, and there's a number of cases.
We have independent invention of things like farming. Yes. Otherwise, farming would never have left either the Indus River Valley or Mesopotamia or the Mississippi, because no one is walking from the Mississippi to Greece.
No.
You simply cannot do that. All right, the Beringer Strait has melted for thousands of years.
Yeah, well, and that's just it. But I think that's a good place. Like, let's holster our guns for now, and I think that's a good place to end this for our first 8 historical humans reactions. Yeah. If you guys like this and you want to see us critique and lose our minds at more archaeological or historical medias, or if you want to see us continue this episode or watch another one, be sure to let us know down below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And obviously our social media links are listed below. Just be sure to give us a follow, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.
Yep.